Hey guys, Pete here. Since history has taught me that regular preview videos don't do well in weeks where the whole episode leaks in advance, and since I won't do videos on episode 6 before it officially airs, I've been racking my brains for an interesting video to make. I looked around at what people are talking about that wasn't related to episode 6, looked around in the usual places, on Reddit and Amino, and then I came across some Jon Targaryen denier threads. So it got me thinking about this dynamic that's in place for what is the last Targaryen. When she first met Jon, Daenerys pointed out that she was the last Targaryen, and that his ancestor Torrhen Stark, the king who kneeled, or the king who knelt, had sworn fealty to her family for perpetuity. Most of us chuckled to ourselves at this in much the same way we did when the dragon flew over his head, just as at that moment when he said he wasn't a Stark. This is because last season the R plus L equals J theory was finally revealed when Bran traveled with the three-eyed raven to the Tower of Joy. There we learned that Rhaegar Targaryen was Jon's father and that Lyanna Stark was his mother as she was dying in that scene. Now, just in case it wasn't clear, HBO posted this infographic, which they added it on their Making a Game of Thrones website, like they do with each episode. They add some interesting things that went into making the episode. And it looks kind of confusing, but Jon's is really simple. There's 3 lines that come out of it. One says guardian, and it goes to Ned Stark. The other 2 lines are parents, and one goes to Rhaegar Targaryen, and the other one goes to Lyanna Stark. So there really wasn't any confusion after this point. Now, people still dislike the idea that that's his parents because they had a different theory or they want it to be a different way. But a lot of the denier stuff you see is just that. People don't like how the story turned out based on their prior beliefs, I guess. But there is no doubt in the show it's canon that those are his parents. So what does this actually mean? Well, Jon is the king in the north, and there is an outside chance that some of the people who were behind him there might not be behind him if they knew he was a Targaryen, but I don't think that's an important part of the dynamic. What is important is that in the last episode, Gilly discovered that Rhaegar had annulled his marriage to Elia Martell, and that he was wed to someone else in a secret ceremony. This someone else is obviously Lyanna, and the fact that the show is going with the idea that they're actually married means that Jon is a rightful heir to the Iron Throne, based on the Targaryen lineage and the order of succession. Because of that line of succession, he actually has a better claim to the throne than Daenerys does, so I'm going to talk about why that is. The normal line would have been the Mad King Aerys. From him, it goes to Rhaegar, because that's his oldest male child. In the case that Rhaegar died and he didn't have any children, then it would go to Viserys, which we know from the show, that was Daenerys' older brother. And then if he died, and which he did, then Daenerys becomes the rightful heir. However, since Rhaegar had children before he died, and Jon is the last remaining of those, he's actually next in line before Daenerys. So at one point, Viserys thought he was the rightful heir to the Iron Throne. After he was out of the picture, then Daenerys thought she was. This is all under the pretext that Robert is a usurper, though. You have to remember that. If Robert's rebellion never happened and he never took the throne for House Baratheon, that's how things would have played out. Of course, in that scenario, Elia's children wouldn't have been killed, and they would actually have a stronger claim before Jon based on how the whole annulment thing goes down. And there has been a lot of talk about how this annulment, whether it's legitimate and all these different things, or if it would have really happened. According to the author, George R.R. Martin, an annulment can be put forward by either party. It's not exactly the same as what we might know from our own history, but you can make it work in the context of the story. It doesn't make a whole lot of sense, but let's just go with the idea that they wouldn't have brought this up in the show if that's not what they intended, if they didn't intend for it to be important. So what does this actually mean? Well, it might not mean anything for a couple of reasons. One reason is that it may never come up. The idea of who's going to sit on the Iron Throne may become unimportant to the endgame, since we know that there's a battle going on for humanity's existence with the White Walkers. It also might not matter if Jon decides he doesn't want to sit on the Iron Throne. But that's not as neat and clean as you might think. He didn't necessarily want to be the Lord Commander of the Night's Watch, but he ended up being that. He never really wanted to be the King in the North, but he is the King in the North. So instead of just looking at Jon as a reluctant hero or a reluctant leader who would never want the throne, he's the kind of guy who does what he thinks is best. So if people got behind the idea that he should be on the throne rather than Daenerys, then there's a very good chance that he might get behind that idea too. And since a lot of people in the story are worried about Daenerys becoming like her father, that's a very real possibility based on him, people finding out what his true bloodline is. Now, the question beyond that is, who actually knows about Jon's parents? Well, Bran saw the Tower of Joy. He was shown that by the three-eyed raven, and there's a good chance that now that he's going in and looking at all this different stuff, he would have found out by now who Jon's father is, you know what I mean? Like, that seems like an important part of the information. I've thought for a long time, along with a lot of other people, that Bran would be the one who would end up telling Jon. They haven't seen each other for a long time, but eventually their paths are going to cross again. Of course, we brought up the idea that Gilly has seen this information. We don't know if that's going to come back up in that sense, so she doesn't actually know who they are. Littlefinger may know. There has been little clues that he might know the actual truth about Rhaegar and Lyanna, but he would have to have a good reason to put it out there. Then we also have the last remaining person who was present at the Tower of Joy, and that's Hallan Reed, Mira's father. He's long been a mystery about where he's going to come back into the story. And the show may very well not bring him back in at all. But we saw Mira leave this season to go home, so that could come up. And personally, I hope it comes up. I hope Hallan Reed comes to tell the real story. But we really don't know because other than the flashback, he hasn't played any real role in the TV show. And there's also the crypts as well. Before the show got to where it's at in the story, there's always been theories about important things being inside the crypts that could reveal Jon's parentage. And the characters do seem to spend a decent amount of time down there. But I feel like if that's going to come into the story at this point, it's probably going to be through Bran saying that there's something there that they're going to find. Like, it's not just going to happen organically, if you know what I mean. So what do we think was going to happen whenever Daenerys, who believes she is the last Targaryen and the person who is destined to sit on the throne, actually finds out that her claim isn't as good as Jon's? As it stands now, they don't know they're related, and they're clearly falling for each other. Most people agree now that there is a relationship in the future for these people, but at some point they're going to find out that she's his aunt. Could this whole thing be figuring into that? Because if she believes that she should be there on the Iron Throne as a leader of the Seven Kingdoms, a ruler, it may be necessary for her to get with Jon if he has the better claim. Like, it sort of rules out the idea of a political marriage per se, like, since they're related, but at the same time it doesn't, because in their family this has happened before. And you have to remember, like, if you're opposed to this idea of them getting together, that's okay, but you have to remember how this story has been put together. There's not incest in this story because the author thinks that's great and that people should do that. He's pointing out all the problems in this kind of governing, in the patriarchy, the feudalistic dynamic of if you're the firstborn son, you hit the lottery. If you're a bastard, you're nobody. You know what I mean? Like, there's a lot of commentary here about things that really happened in history. They're not endorsing any of these things. They're just saying that it used to be like this, and look how crazy people got over holding on to power. They would even marry their own family members, you see? So always keep that in the back of your mind if you're having trouble with that idea. In that way, like, Daenerys is reasonable to a certain extent, but I can't see her being like, oh, okay, well, this changes everything. I just went through all of this stuff and got over here to rule the kingdoms, but I'll just give it up to Jon because Jon has a better claim. It's very hard to imagine that happening in the current climate of what's going down. But I do think that that only leaves the door open to a marriage rather than other things. I mean, of course, Daenerys could die and Jon could sit on the Iron Throne after the fact, but none of the decisions that they make going forward are going to involve one of them dying. Like, if this comes up, they have to make a decision on what to do in light of the information. And in order to get to that place, they have to both be alive, right? So I think my point of view on the whole thing is the Iron Throne isn't going to matter. But I do wonder how this might influence their decisions going into the War for the Dawn. As far as dragons are concerned, I mean, we all know that Jon is likely going to ride Rhaegal any time, and that would prove that he has the blood of old Valyria in him, but it doesn't really get to the bottom of why that is. So that situation brings up more questions than answers, like, why are the dragons not bothered by you? I mean, Tyrion has been reading about dragons all his life, so you would think that he would know the rules of dragon riders as much as the average reader of the books does. So Jon hopping on the back would start people wondering why he's able to do that, because he is a bastard after all. They'd want to know where that blood came from. So I think it's going to come out one way or the other. The big question is, how does it advance the story? And what do we expect is going to happen once everyone finds out? Will it cause a rift, or will it lead to a marriage? And there's one last thing that I want to talk about before I cut this off, and that is that there is another Targaryen in the books. When they say the last Targaryen, obviously there's Targaryen blood out there in the world, but when they say the last Targaryen, or I'm saying the last Targaryens, I'm talking about ones that are directly in the line of succession. In the books, we have Aegon, or fake Aegon, whichever one you like to call him, depending on what you think. And it's interesting because in the show, we have Cersei on the Iron Throne, which is something I don't think was ever going to happen there. I think there will be a change of power, but it'll be Aegon that sits there, and then Dany has to decide how to deal with this other person as a Targaryen. So they could be absorbing some of what they know about the future story from what George R.R. Martin told them about Aegon's part, because they aren't going to show Aegon on the TV show. So are they absorbing part of that in the Jon story? It's possible, but with such a short amount of time left, I can't really see things flipping into an adversarial role, like where these two Targaryen heirs are actually at each other's throats or at odds. So I'm interested to see what you guys think. Let me know in the comments. Please like the video if you enjoyed it. Make sure you subscribe to my channel if you haven't done so already. Follow me on Twitter and my other social media accounts. Thanks for watching. I'll talk to you soon.